When Grover Cleveland defeated Benjamin Harrison in 1892, he became the only president to win non-consecutive terms. In the last decade of the century, despite unprecedented industrial growth, most Americans still found work down on the farm. The 1890 census showed farm workers outnumbered job holders in all other industries combined. Statistics also showed it was an uneducated workforce. Only 1 in 400 Americans earned a college degree. In the 1890s, workers faced an uncertain future. As Cleveland took office for the second time, he was confronted with the worst economic crisis in the nation's history. 15,000 businesses would fail. Millions lost their jobs. Many went hungry. In Chicago, President Cleveland sent federal troops to disperse masses of unemployed and striking rail workers led by Eugene Debs. The ensuing chaos was some of the worst domestic violence since the Civil War. Activist Republicans said Cleveland showed little concern for the many who suffered.
In response to the Great Depression, Cleveland did too little, too late, and was unwilling to bend and to try things that might help the ordinary folk who were bearing the brunt of the Depression, which is why the soup kitchens doling out relief were derisively termed Cleveland cafes. We've got to understand the roles of the parties were very different in the Civil War and immediate Civil War period than they are in the 20th century. In this period, the Republicans were the activist party, and the Democrats tended to be the more passive party. And Cleveland is a Democrat of that era. He's not a modern Democrat.
Cleveland left the White House with his popularity at a low ebb. He had been called Grover the Good, but now was deeply hurt that he had lost the confidence of the American people. He retired to Princeton, New Jersey. Over time, his reputation was restored. He died on June 24th, 1908. His last words were, "I have tried so hard to do right."
From New York. Cleveland's return to the presidency was triumphant. With his young wife, Frances, and their new daughter, baby Ruth, the Clevelands were more popular than ever. Unfortunately, an economic disaster was about to strike. A month after Cleveland regained the office, the panic of 1893 hit. The great industrial bubble of the 19th century had burst.
The 1890s saw the worst economic depression in American history until that point. Starting in 1893, tens of thousands of people were thrown out of work, and this at a time when there was essentially no social safety net.
In protest, an army of the unemployed marched on Washington, the first of its kind.
When they arrived in Washington, Cleveland had them arrested for trespassing on the grounds in the Capitol.
Grover Cleveland might well feel compassion for the poor and those in want, but he didn't think it was the national government's responsibility to provide jobs in a depression or help of any kind. He was not a cruel man or an uncompassionate man. I think any other president in the 1890s would have behaved the way he did.
Complicating matters was the debate over the nation's monetary system. Eastern industrialists insisted on gold, the supply of which they controlled. In opposition, farmers, Westerners, and a grassroots party known as the Populists supported bimetallism, a currency system which allowed silver and gold. The monetary debate was the central political issue of the 1890s, representative of a deeper war over opposing beliefs on public policy, finance, and the equitable distribution of wealth. Cleveland opposed bimetallism, declaring that the solidity of the gold standard would end the Depression. This made Cleveland look like a pawn of the industrialists, and suddenly his popularity among the masses faded.
I find him in many ways a fascinating figure and an admirable figure. I just wish he had only been elected to one term. I think the second term was a great misfortune for him and for the country.
Unable to heal the nation's economic crisis, and out of touch with the growing political movement for government reform, Cleveland was dropped from the Democratic ticket in the election of 1896. When Grover Cleveland exited the White House for the final time, he left a legacy as the last of the laid-back 19th century-style presidents. He had hoped to passively steer the ship of state into the future by maintaining the status quo. Instead, he found himself unable to deal with the dynamic changes that were pushing the nation very quickly into the 20th century.